So I will have to disappoint you. I did not bring any confetti cannons with OWASP SAMM, but I'm actually going to talk about two of my favorite topics. It's about OWASP SAMM as a software assurance maturity model, which indeed we already use for over a decade, but also about threat modeling, understanding what kind of threat actors are potentially attacking your systems and software, and the interaction between both, because I believe that threat modeling itself is a pivoting activity for SAMM to make the implementation better, but also the other way, all the way around. We can use SAMM to improve our threat modeling practice, and that's really what I'm going to cover today. My background, indeed, I'm from Belgium. I started a company there called Torion. We also deliver lots of training with both security trainings, but also data protection trainings with Data Protection Institute, and a lot of threat modeling trainings, both in Belgium but also abroad. Besides professionally doing software security for probably more than 20 years now, I've also been quite active in the OWASP community, having charted a chapter in Belgium in 2005 already, and I've also been involved in the SAMM project as a co-leader. So I'm obviously not doing this alone. I'm doing this together with a lot of great people that are working together with this on this project. But what is the problem? What is the challenge that we are actually trying not to solve, but to manage? Actually, it's the fantastic speed and innovation of IT and software over the last probably like 30-40 years, which is now even increasing towards machine learning and AI. So the big challenges there for us as security in general is how can we keep up, how can we make sure that people and developers don't shoot themselves in the foot. So that's our main challenge. So how can we do that? There's a couple of things that we can do. I'm a firm believer that threat modeling is actually a way to help a development team or a product team together and work together with them on understanding their software or their product risks. It's not about shift left or shift right, it's about shifting together. It's about understanding what are they building, helping them in making product design choices. That's really what threat modeling is about. It's understanding what can go wrong and doing something together with the team about it. And it's about not only providing them with these choices, but also explaining to them how they can do that. And once they start and have that understanding, next time when they build a new feature, they will also be able to think about security and include that. And that's the way we can actually integrate and build in security as part of a development lifecycle. Now, how do we do this? Very short, brief introduction to threat modeling. Threat modeling, you know threat modeling probably from the 4-question framework from Adam Shostak. We've translated that into a very practical framework. We've obviously had to come up with our own acronym. We call it DICE. DICE is for, first of all, understanding what are we building through diagramming applications, both on whiteboards, but also with software. It's about understanding what can go wrong through identification of threats together with the team, understanding the threat actors, understanding the attack surface in your products, in your systems. Obviously, not only for hacking it, I would say, virtually, but also to build in countermeasures. Countermeasures, security controls, up to a level that it is adequate or good enough. And actually, the threat modeling itself is a really good activity to learn together with a team and to evaluate what you have done together, to evaluate your threat model and to continuously improve it. And if you think that threat modeling is more like a big upfront activity, that is not really what threat modeling is about. Threat modeling has evolved over the last couple of years in terms of aligning this based on how product or development teams are working. They can still work in waterfall style, where threat modeling is typically done together with a team during analysis phase. But you can also do this as part of an agile workflow, where during sprint refinement, somebody within the team, security champion, maybe with the help of a threat modeler, is going to think also about, okay, thinking about the stories, the epics that we're now going to build into the next sprint, is there going to be an impact on security, yes or no? And based on that, are we going to update our threat model? Same thing even goes for DevOps. You can really do threat modeling on features, on small iterations. It's about making sure that people who are developing it understand the potential risks. And this is something you have to do together. That is the way threat modeling is done. And in that way, you can indeed keep up with the speed of a development team. So there's lots of advantages of threat modeling. One of the main advantages is to try to prevent flaws. We're focusing on design flaws. But a major benefit of doing threat modeling, which I already shared, is about creating that shared vision on how do we build in, or how do we keep into in our minds about security or privacy challenges in our system or our software. And creating that awareness and working towards a shared vision together with a team, a product manager, and security is one of the major side effects, but one of the biggest impacts you can create with threat modeling, which lasts over time together with when you work with a product team. Obviously, the main focus, the main objective is to identify and also manage risk, and that is obviously the more positive use case. Another use case is to also have traceability about these choices. More and more regulation and other rules and policies require us to have traceability about what we have done in terms of security in our products, both in automotive, in medical devices, when you process personal data for GDPR, privacy by design. This all requires to do privacy threat modeling or security threat modeling. Obviously, keeping track of that will keep or make sure that the product team, together with the product team, you have that traceability and you document that, and that you can also support that compliance pressure. Now, why aren't we all doing this then? Because there's quite some challenges with threat modeling. By design, threat modeling requires some security expertise to be injected as part of the threat modeling activity. It will require time. You have to face people, you have to make appointments, you have to do workshops with the involved people. So the more efficient we can do this, the better, but it is still a time-intensive activity. It is not something that can be easily automated. There is tools out there, they're improving, there's open source tools, there's commercial tools, but they're still quite limited in terms of functionality. And it's not like that you can point like a threat modeling tool at your design and it will all of a sudden spit out your threat model. And obviously it comes with scalability issues. You can do this for a couple of applications, but once you come across organizations where you have hundreds or even thousands of applications, then it becomes another ballgame. So there we also have to think of how can we solve that. It's doable, but we have to build in and become more mature at threat modeling. And that's where SAMM comes into play. OWASP SAMM is a software assurance maturity model where we focus on making the security activities that we build into our development life cycles to make them measurable. Once you can measure it, you can manage it. And that's the biggest advantage of a maturity model. SAMM itself is also prescriptive, that it describes what you can do in terms of activities, and it as a methodology, as a framework. It's technology agnostic, so you can apply this on any, I would say, type of product or any type of development. It's like a big box of building blocks that you can apply and integrate into your way of working. Now, how does this look like? And this is, I would say, the 5-minute introduction to OWASP SAMM. There's lots of resources online there. OWASP SAMM is built out of 5 business functions: the governance, design, implementation, verification, and operations of software, where each of these business functions has 3 security practices, and within these 3 security practices are 2 streams. Now these are all streams, potential security activities that you can include in your development lifecycle. You don't need to include them all, but also you can include them up to a certain level of maturity, and that's the maturity model behind that. I'll explain later how that works. What really interests us here is the interaction with the threat modeling part. Threat modeling in itself is part of the architecture, the design track of SAMM, and it comprises out of like understanding risk within applications and the threat modeling activity itself. Now, as I already explained during the beginning, we see, and I personally see threat modeling really as a pivoting activity in any SAMM implementation. You can have like very basic activities like security testing, trainings, coding guidelines, and so on. But if you don't really understand the threats for your systems, then it's going to be very hard to prevent or detect attacks against those systems. And that's where threat modeling can help us. So there's a big interaction between the threat modeling and other SAMM practices. For instance, the interaction with security requirements. Security requirements are important to include in your development of functionality. But through threat modeling, you also understand other potential requirements. You're going to look at, okay, who are we going to attack? Who are we going to prevent against or detect? Or who are we going to, I would say, protect against in terms of attackers? And based on those attacker scenarios, we're going to think about, okay, what kind of security requirements do we need to add into our backlog to reach a certain level of security? Another interaction obviously is with security architecture part, where there's design patterns, reference architectures, but also lists of technology that you should consider or can consider for your software. So there again, there's a big interaction with threat modeling. There's other interactions. Threat modeling in itself is really done during design. It has the biggest payoff during design, but it's gold for a security tester. If you do a test on software and you have a threat model available, you have a better understanding of the attack surface, you have a better understanding of how the software works, and your scoping will be more precise, and your attacks will have more impact in terms of testing. Obviously, the testing itself will also reveal other threats that you haven't thought about. So it will help you to become and to improve your threat model, because threat modeling is an iterative activity, and your first threat model will not be correct. It's a model. But by counterbalancing this with other activities where you test the software, the system, you can improve and feedback into your threat model and improve and make it better. And so that is definitely an interaction that we see as well. There is also the validation of the architecture that leans very heavily on the understanding of the architecture and the threat model. And then last but not least, a good threat model makes you better in terms of incident detection and response. If you understand your threat model, you don't really need to fix everything. But if you know against which attackers or which potential attackers are going to attack your system, or through what means, or through what attack surfaces, you'll have a better chance at detecting attacks and even responding to attacks. So you see that threat modeling itself will help improve the maturity of a lot of other security activities in an overall SAMM implementation. So that in itself is a really good reason to consider improving the threat modeling maturity. Now, I promised about the maturity. Within SAMM overall, there's 3 levels. Well, actually, it's 4. If you don't do a certain security practice, it's a level 0. You're not doing this. If you're doing this ad hoc, like you have a basic understanding, you're doing this just like basic testing for security controls as part of security testing, or basic security requirements when it comes to security requirements, that's a level 0. If you want to reach a higher level of maturity, based on what kind of product you're working on and the risk profile of that application, or just also the risk appetite of the involved leadership. You can consider higher levels of maturity in each of the security practices. And level 2 is typically becoming more efficient at it, becoming more effective at it, tuning the security activity towards a specific software or the product. And then if you want to go even further, then you go towards level 3, where you have a complete mastery of that particular security practice, and typically also feedback loops in the rest of the model. One key point of advice, SAMM in itself, in a maturity model, you should really not aim for the highest level of maturity. It's only in certain circumstances and in very, I would say, critical systems, this is something to reach as an objective. But for, I would say, the majority of our systems and our code, lower levels of maturity are perfectly fine. Again, this will be based on your threat model and your understanding of what the software obviously is going to do. Now, if we translate this to the threat modeling activity, you have the same levels. Either you're not doing it, or you're doing basic threat modeling. And this is just best effort, risk-based threat modeling, where you sit together with a developer, go over the product and provide him or her with some advice. The only requirement there is you need to have some persistence of the outcome, so that you can iterate over that same threat model in the next iteration. That's a level 1. A level 2 is where we are going to improve the threat modeling practice in terms of a people process technology point of view. We're going to train people that are going to threat model. We're going to embed the threat modeling as part of the process that you typically already have in your organization in terms of development, also in terms of risk management. And you're also going to add some tooling to support this. And so that is the typical, I would say, level 2 maturity level of threat modeling. If you want to aim for a higher level of threat modeling, which in some cases is really can be really beneficial and pivotal towards the other activities, we aim for a level 3. And that's where we are going to optimize our way of working. We're also going to make it more scalable and going to also automate as much as possible the threat modeling outcome and interaction with the other systems. And that's where you'll have much more impact. As with any security practice and security activity, one level of maturity will build upon the other. Right? So you have to do first the baby steps, become better at this, and only, I would say, after you've reached level 2, can reach for level 3 maturity. So how can we scale this up in I would say, overall? There's a couple of aspects to consider. First of all, it's about alignment with how can we align our threat modeling with the rest of our SAMM implementation and with our technology stack and what we're doing within the organization. It's about balancing what kind of security we are building in with our risk appetite, also the types of attackers that are going to attack our systems, which is going to be completely different for just like an e-commerce site or a banking app or critical infrastructure. You'll just have different types of attackers, and you'll have different levels of threat modeling. And you also sometimes need different levels of assurance. Sometimes they're high, sometimes they're low. So this is a term of like typically something you need to align. Another aspect is to align together with the team in terms of like what can they do, what are their resources, what is their current understanding, how can we create their or improve their awareness and work towards that shared vision in terms of security and privacy. So it's really making sure that we can like make that work together, and that's the main challenge with threat modeling. And then one of the key steps in threat modeling, because it's perceived as, and it's sometimes really can be an expensive activity in terms of time, it's to demonstrate the value that it brings. Because if you only focus on the threat model itself and all the risks it might pop up, and bring, I would say, and give you that understanding, it's going to be expensive. So you have to also explain and demonstrate the additional benefits that threat modeling brings. It's the raised awareness, it's obviously the improved security, it's the reducing the number of incidents or the incident response time, it's about minimizing delays. I've come across many projects where the threat modeling itself was not only done in terms of like, okay, we want to reduce our, I would say, potential impact when we have security incidents, but also about we don't want to have delays in terms of when we put our new iteration or a new release into production. Specifically in more regulated environments, this is a really important topic. There's enough examples or projects where we came across organizations that wanted to bring a medical device into the market in the US. The FDA currently requires every new medical device to have a threat model, a documented threat model, and to have full traceability about the security decision made during the development cycle. If you don't bring that together with the rest of your documentation towards the FDA as part of your submission, you immediately have a 180 days delay. And I can assure you, if you have 180 delays with a medical device, that is going to hurt a lot. And so that's the kind of return of investment that threat modeling brings you. But it's about making sure you make it visible. So how can we do this? How can we improve the overall maturity of the threat modeling practice? If we drill down on threat modeling as an activity, you have the very core activity of the threat modeling itself. But if you want to scale it up, there's a lot of potential components to consider as part of threat modeling. And we have to obviously understand, make sure that people are trained. We're going to not only focus on that one threat model, but we're going to understand or extract parts of our learned aspects into threat modeling in an organization and create and deploy templates and risk patterns. We want to integrate this as part of the SDL. We want to organize this and make sure it's aligned with our strategy. It's also about making sure that's being supported by people in the organization, by abstract champions and the people involved. And obviously, at a certain point in time, you will need that tooling. So, if I'm going to explain these different aspects, I'm going to provide you with a couple of examples here. Training, threat modeling is an important aspect because it's not an easy thing to do, but it's, on the other side, not too complex, but you have to train people on what we call their jobs to be done. Some people need more knowledge about threat modeling because they're going to support a team as an abstract champion in doing that, or improving a threat model, or identifying when a threat model needs to be updated. But the product owner doesn't need to know all these details. They only need to understand what a threat model is and what's in it for them. So each of potential roles in an overall development lifecycle has a certain need to understand what threat modeling is about. And there's different ways of training people, both in an interactive way, in online CBTs, but also through coaching. Templates and patterns will also help to scale up threat modeling. You will need, if you provide a development team with a template, they will be much faster in like creating or updating the threat model for the sprint that they are working on, instead of doing everything from scratch. So that's a really important cornerstone. You also need to align that on the risk profiles of the applications, and it really helps to provide teams with risk patterns. We've built risk patterns a lot in the past for our customers, both embedded this in tooling, but also as part of templates, where based on both security risk, but also privacy risks, we make people understand what a potential risk is, explain what risks are, what the potential attacks are, the use cases are, what the potential flaws are in their systems, but also how to counter those with very practical advice that they can integrate directly into their backlog. That's really important. Something to also consider is that you make this as practical as possible and as applicable as possible for our organization. And so more and more you need to implement what we call threat intelligence in your threat models and your threat model patterns. One example there is a MITRE attack. Depending on the types of attacks, their tactics and techniques, you will need to update your risk patterns. And in that way we can integrate in your development life cycle, and it's about adding that security in every step, making sure you have these hooks in the pipelines, and so not only as a manual activity but also with the tooling, so that indeed you can integrate the outcome of the threat model in their dashboards. And then overall, make sure to have buy-in, to organize this together with product owners, with leadership. Make sure it's aligned, that they understand why threat modeling is done. Have some key performance indicators. It's maybe less sexy for a development team, but the product owner is pretty much aware of what's important. So make sure that understanding the threat model is part of the KPIs, and make sure you follow up on this. And the last part is really about making sure that you share this with your community. So it's really about collaboration. Threat modeling is also an activity that should be done in a positive way and not be regarded as an audit. You should really focus on what have you learned here? How can we improve your product together with you as a product team? How can we make you better in your next iteration? Both this, but also sharing this, both internally but also externally. It's about sharing how threat modeling works, how we can do this, obviously internally, but also externally. We have lots of threat modeling communities, both within OWASP. There's also Threat Modeling Connect as a community about sharing what threat modeling is and how we can become better at this. And then the last part is the tooling part, where under the condition that you first have done or an understanding of the first steps, that you know what you're doing and that you've integrated threat modeling in your way of working, tooling can help you become more efficient at threat modeling. It will not do everything, it will support you in doing this. It will make it faster, it will make it more efficient. You can also automate the output of threat modeling towards your ticketing systems, so that to track every potential vulnerability or finding until it's actually closed in a ticketing or a task management system. So it will help organizations and development teams to become better at this in terms of productivity, but also have to think about working together on threat models. And so we have I would say, and my preferred way is to do this around a whiteboard or a flip chart. But I would say nowadays that is harder and harder. Everybody works from home, so you have to work around virtual whiteboards and virtual systems together. And there, a threat model tool will also be able to help you. And so you have to look for threat modeling tools where you can work together on these threat models. So, and in that way, threat modeling can be made better. So if we look at other security practices in SAMM that will improve threat modeling, so we first had like how can threat modeling improve SAMM, but what other activities can we use or leverage to increase our threat modeling maturity? It's about strategy and metrics. That's one of the key security practices in SAMM, to set like the target. Why are we doing this? What are our goals? What kind of security plan are we going to implement? Threat modeling should be an integral part of that. And so that is a key activity to bootstrap and kickstart threat modeling. Another security practice is education and guidance. Like I said in the beginning, people have to understand why and how, depending on their role and their involvement in threat modeling. education and guidance, specifically the training level 2 activity, which is role-based training, is the hook within SAMM to implement training on threat modeling. And then last but not least, track the outcome of your threat models. The outcome of your threat models are findings, are how did you potentially detect certain vulnerabilities in your system, and how do you treat them. And we've created in version 2.0 for SAMM defect management specifically for that. It's for capturing all kinds of findings and vulnerabilities throughout your life cycle, obviously also including threat models. And by measuring this and keeping track of that, we can demonstrate the value of threat modeling itself. One resource there on how to do this is, and this is not new, we already released this a couple of years back, is the OWASP Threat Modeling Playbook, which is actually the steps to perform to actually do this, to get management buy-in, to align this with the process within your organization, and then to follow the 3-step process, the people, processes, technology. And so that's definitely something to have a look at. It's a fully documented playbook available on the GitHub in Markdown, so you can reuse this in your way of working. Now, if this threat modeling playbook, you can, I would say, implement it as such, but I would recommend to also consider the typical steps of SAMM when you are going to iterate to improve your secure development lifecycle in the next, I would say, 6 months, a year. SAMM itself has an improvement cycle. So we're going to actually also apply SAMM as an improvement cycle for threat modeling. And it comes down to assessing where you are, setting your targets, creating a roadmap, executing that roadmap, and demonstrating that it provides value. And these are also the steps that we do in SAMM for any security practice. But if we apply it on threat modeling, well, first of all, you have to assess where you are currently, in your current practice, in your current way of developing. What are you already doing? To what level of maturity are you already doing threat modeling? What components do you potentially already have in place or not in your specific environment? And then it's about understanding your targets. And this target will really depend on how critical are my applications or my products for our customers, for our business. How critical is the uptime of my service? And based on that, you will have to do more or less in terms of threat modeling. So we're applying this as an example on threat modeling, but this way of thinking is really applied on the overall SAMM implementation, but we're focusing here on the threat modeling part. And then we'll build a roadmap, and we decide what kind of steps we're going to plan over the next couple of weeks, months, years, because this will take some resources. You will have to train people, you will potentially have to consider toolings, but you will have to try it out with different teams and become better at it and start to build your own templates and patterns. And that's really something that does take some time. As with any SAMM implementation in general, don't expect results after 2 or 3 weeks. Typically, you will have decent results after 1 or 2 years. And that's with any SDL implementation. And then it's about execution. It's really following up. It's making sure that you're doing this together with the teams, that you're learning from it. You will come across, I would say, blocking aspects. So make sure to see these, to detect these, to have workarounds. But the most important thing is really about doing this together with product teams and learning from that. And then last but not least, it's about demonstrating that value. I'm nearly there. Demonstrating the value of threat modeling through what I already explained, what it brings in terms of awareness, what it brings in terms of assurance, what it brings in terms of increased security, and also understanding the potential attacks as part of the incident and response phases. And then overall, there's a couple of KPIs in threat modeling that are important to start to measure as part of the defect management. And it's not like the amount of design flaws found, because you will always find potential design flaws, like with any tools. It's really about how are we able to reduce our attack surface by removing functionality or by changing the design of certain products when you have that, I would say, potential as part of design, but also maybe by decommissioning certain parts of the application or disabling them because they're not being used. It's about making sure that you track the number of vulnerabilities that were removed about the system, and about also the impact in terms of less delays whenever you go to your next iteration and your next steps. The less surprises we have, the better it is, and that's really where threat modeling is going to help you. So I'll bring with you, so this is like the high level I would say overview of how threat modeling will help you improve and become better at implementing SAMM implementation, but also how SAMM itself can help you to become better at threat modeling, and that is the interaction. So there's a couple of resources here. We have the OWASP threat modeling playbook. I'll also share the slides with the team here later on. Obviously OWASP SAMM, we have everything available on our website. There's links there to our Slack workspace, the GitHub supporting the OWASP projects, and so on. And obviously also want to pitch our threat modeling insider newsletter, where on a monthly basis we have new articles on threat modeling and tips and tricks on this. So that's really my introduction into SAMM and threat modeling, and with that we have some time for questions.